Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin the webinar in about 2 minutes. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We will start the webinar shortly. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll be starting the webinar here in just a little bit. Good morning, everyone. It's the top of the hour, so we'll get started. Welcome to Reviewing and Defending Against the Latest Cybersecurity Attacks in Manufacturing. And we want to thank you for joining us today. Let me just take a moment and introduce myself. I'm Thomas Freeman. I'm the manager of pen testing here at Sikich. Sikich is a technology-enabled professional services firm specializing in accounting, tax, technology, and advisory services. Our team is dedicated to providing proactive service to help clients succeed. With over 1,400 employees, we are listed as one of the top 30 largest CPA firms in the US. We have a global presence in over 100 countries through affiliation with Prime Global. Now, cybersecurity practice has more than 30 team members. We have team members and clients across the US, and we enjoy being able to connect with you all virtually this morning. We do, in our cybersecurity team, focus on GRC. That includes risk assessments, forensic analysis. We also have virtual CISOs who can assist with making cybersecurity risk assessments and decisions. And then we also have our penetration testing team and our auditing and compliance teams. I apologize. I'm having some technical difficulty this morning, so I cannot display my camera. But before we begin the discussion, I do want to go ahead and go through some brief housekeeping items. I encourage you all to use the questions feature. We'll be monitoring for your questions, and we will have time to cover a few at the end of the session today. If your question cannot be addressed during the presentation, we will follow up after the webinar with you. The slides for today are available to you to download. CPE credit is being offered for this presentation. Polling questions we will launch throughout the webinar. These will need to be answered in order to receive credit for attending the presentation. And at the conclusion of the webinar, there will be a short survey. You will need to complete the evaluation for your CPE credit. Certificates will be emailed after the program, but within 2 weeks. Okay, let's meet our presenter. So I'm happy to introduce my colleague, Dr. Michael View from our cybersecurity team. Michael has been with the team for many years, and he is a technical manager. And let me just turn it over to you, Michael, to take it from there.
Excellent. Thank you, Thomas. Good morning, everybody. I'm very excited to talk to you all this morning about the latest in cybersecurity risks. So I know we've done this in the past, so I wanted to sort of take a look and see how 2022 is going thus far. There's obviously always new attacks happening pretty much on a daily basis that revolve in many different industries around cybersecurity. So in this particular one, we've found that the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, or the CISA, has recently published some new notices around attacks against industrial controls systems. This seems to be more popular in recent years and recent months, as these are exposed either to the internet or have vulnerabilities found in them. For example, the two I wanted to talk about this morning is related to the Metasys server. So the Metasys is a system control platform that is used for managing systems throughout your organization. And there's been a recent CVE for it. Basically what happens is an attacker, an authorized attacker, can elevate their privileges to a system administrator level control. So what happens is, if somebody has access to the Metasys system, they would be able to elevate their privileges and essentially become an administrator on the system and take control over it and cause your organization significant damage. So for that, if you're familiar with like the CVSS calculator, that brings it out to an 8.8 out of 10. So it's a fairly significant issue that really kind of does need to be addressed. So the second one that I found interesting while looking over the plethora of vulnerabilities that are available, the Delta Electronic management system is a system, again, used a lot in industry. And there are several CVEs that are related to this issue. One specifically was related to path traversal, which allows an attacker to put arbitrary files on the system and then execute them. There's also a number of SQL injections in this particular announcement or this notice as well. So kind of combining the the path traversal attack and the SQL injection attacks, an attacker can access the system and then essentially gain full control and then cause you a significant amount of damage. Again, this is extremely high as well. So it comes out to an actual 9.8 out of 10 on the CVSS calculator, if you're familiar with that scale. So a very significant issue that does sort of need to be looked at and addressed. There's obviously all kinds of attacks against industrial control systems. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is, we're seeing that a lot of industries patch their systems well enough, or they'll patch their workstations and their servers and their web servers because that's what they feel is vulnerable. But a lot of individuals are not patching their back-end systems like these industrial controls or Metasys systems. So, this is sort of the make sure that we're patching all of our systems globally throughout the organization, not just Windows or the Linux servers of the world. So we have to sort of patch them all.
Hey, Michael.
Yes.
Can I ask you a quick question there?
Yeah.
So in a situation where a manufacturing company is using a legacy operating system to run a controller like that, and the manufacturer just has not produced an upgrade, and the manufacturing company finds their hands really tied. It's not something that they can upgrade. Do you have a recommendation for how they could protect that equipment in that situation?
That's a great question, Thomas. So in that situation, we recommend sort of sheltering that equipment off. Obviously, do not expose it to the internet. Limit access to that equipment through something like a VLAN, or put it behind a firewall, so that way it is sheltered in such a way that only a select individuals that can get to it, that need to get to it to manage it, and then it can only talk to the equipment that it's supposed to be managing, and so it's off the primary network in the organization.
Excellent, thank you.
So similarly, this is another thing we found throughout the year, the beginning part of this year rather, that Microsoft Dynamics was vulnerable to several types of attacks. So in this particular instance, we've got 4 of them listed here. There definitely could be others. In case you're not aware, Microsoft Dynamics Great Plains is a very predominant ERP package that's used throughout the industry. So as you can see here, the 4 that are listed have medium to high, what we would consider medium to high CVE numbers. But the crux of it is the older versions, again, so the older versions that you may not necessarily be paying attention to, that you might have in your organization, are vulnerable to a wide variety of attacks. These ones specifically were mostly privilege escalation attacks. So the individual needed access into the Great Plains system to begin with. However, an attacker could use something like this. Let's say they were in your organization and they were able to compromise several workstations. If that workstation they've compromised, that individual has a weak password into Great Plains, and the attacker could either guess it or grab it from their system, the attacker then could use that information to damage the data within Great Plains. And if the attacker did gain access, the access they had was administrative level, so they could add, delete, encrypt, do whatever they wanted to the information inside of Great Plains. So it was a significant amount of access that the individual would have. So again, this is sort of just one of those. We found a lot of our clients were doing a good job patching their systems, but we're sort of neglecting things like Great Plains, where it did have significant issues. So we wanted to make sure that we sort of brought this up and make sure that you're patching all of your systems and looking at it. Obviously, there's newer versions of Great Plains that are not vulnerable. There's also ways to mitigate this, like multi-factor authentication, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So one of the I don't even want to say newer, because this has been going on for quite some time, but more popularized recently attacks is what's known as a software supply chain attack. So basically what we have here is we've got an attacker with the goal of trying to break into a company, your company or another company. And for whatever reason, you've done a great job. So you've been able to block that attacker from gaining access from the internet. Everything is patched and doing well. So the attacker might go after a software vendor that you use quite predominantly. Let's say Microsoft Great Plains or Adobe, or in recent years, maybe you've heard of the SolarWinds issue. So it's that type of issue. So they go after that particular piece of software and try to take over the system, as they did in 2020 with SolarWinds. Basically, the attackers sat in the organization for quite a number of months, trying to sort of get into the build system, and they were actually successful to get into the build servers of SolarWinds and inject their malicious code, and then basically infect all of the organizations that utilized that software. So it's not so much in a targeted attack, perhaps against your organization, but it can definitely affect your organization if you are using older software or maybe something that is not as predominant, say like as a Microsoft or Adobe, right? That they do a lot to protect their systems.
So, Michael, another quick question for you. So, when we talk about something like SolarWinds, it's a very large company, and like you said, this probably was more of a collateral damage attack to a lot of companies. I mean, if a manufacturing company was using SolarWinds to kind of manage and protect their IT infrastructure, um, and the government maybe was also using SolarWinds, then an attacker might inject malicious code into the SolarWinds software base purposefully to attack our government infrastructure. But as collateral, they end up attacking a manufacturing company and realize that they have access to it. So I've heard of people saying, well, I don't use the big names. I use a smaller vendor in order to keep from having something like that happen, because I assume that we're small and this smaller vendor is going to be under the radar, so to speak. Like, what kind of protection, or is there due diligence that we need to do if we're going to work with a company that could possibly have a weak vulnerability management program in their company? Like, what are things that a manufacturing company can do as due diligence for that?
That's a good question. So that is fairly tricky, because you obviously want to hopefully be able to trust the organization that you're doing business with and make sure that or assume that they are doing their due diligence and protecting their systems as much as possible. But if it is a strong partnership, maybe if it's where you buy, all of your machinery from or something like that, it's not uncommon to work with them as a vendor and say, listen, we need to understand your cybersecurity practice. We need to understand what you do to protect your systems and what the software supply chain looks like. So how are we getting updates? What protections are in place to sort of protect us downstream from your information or from a possible attack of your systems? So depending on the level of relationship, going through the process of saying, hey, let's sit down and have that conversation about your cybersecurity practices and how it could potentially affect us as your customer is not unreasonable.
Sure, and I would think at times they may even have some certifications already in place, like SOC 2, Type 2, or if they have a compliance, for some type of a, CMMC or some other kind of compliance that they need to fit into, then those documents might assist us in being able to kind of have some confidence. So yeah, that's good.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, because that's kind of information that would come out in that sort of due diligence review, right? Is what are you doing? And they would say, hey, listen, we have, security awareness training, or we're SOC 2 compliant, or whatever it is. We have pen tests done every year, et cetera, et cetera. Or so, that's the information you're looking for.
Very good. Thanks.
So yeah, the other, let's see, the next one is possibly sounds like it's a bit far-fetched, but it's something that's definitely coming our way. If you've heard of quantum computing. So the idea behind, real quick primer, but the idea behind quantum computing is it can do more computations in a very unique way. So basically it can live in a space where ones and zeros exist simultaneously. It's not an either or anymore. So it has the ability to generate and produce large computations extremely quickly. And today we have this mentality of extremely strong cryptography and so if you're familiar with public and private key cryptography, we use that quite a bit. Something like a PGP key, or maybe how you protect your backups. So hopefully you're packing up your systems to, say, the cloud, you're password protecting or encrypting those backups in such a way. Even if you're using the latest encryption, say AES or 2000-bit encryptions, quantum computers have the abilities to crack that within hours versus thousands of years. So it's not quite here yet. Certainly not trying to scare people into running out and throwing away all their encryption, but it's something that's coming, and it's coming very quickly. So the saving grace to this is quantum computers right now have a very high error rate. So it's not, attacker's not going to use this tomorrow, but as the error rates come down and quantum computers become more readily accessible, we're definitely going to be seeing a problem with encryption. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because one of our biggest recommendations is to, again, encrypt your backups, right? So we have the idea of being able to protect against like a ransomware attack is you produce a backup. If you were infected with a ransomware attack, you can simply restore from backup, right? And then that way you don't have to pay the attackers. In this case, if, let's just say theoretically, the attackers were able to get a hold of a quantum computer, they might possibly be able to, or it's more likely that they're going to be able to actually decrypt your backups and then basically render them unusable to you as well. So the ransomware attack is going to be more successful. So really the big takeaway here is understanding that this type of technology is coming. It's not, science fiction, it's science fact these days. They're already starting to work on what they're deeming quantum resistant cryptography. And so they're working on building the standard right now. I do not know of any actual software products that have done it, but they are working on it, and that's going to be by 2024. So it's just a few years away. So I would think easily within the next decade, we're going to start seeing this kind of technology and new standards appear. And I think it's really important, again, just to make sure your systems are up to date or capable of being upgraded. So if you're sort of running extremely old systems for most likely a good purpose in manufacturing. I worked in manufacturing for a very long time, and I probably understand that there's a need for that old system because it runs the $500,000 machine that makes your widgets. But starting to look at how to upgrade that software, upgrade that machinery, so that way it can sort of be future-proofed, if you will, right? So at some point, we're going to get this new technology, and it's not going to be backwards compatible to everything. So that's really the strong point here is start thinking now, how do we protect ourselves? How can we get onto current platforms and make sure that we're safe?
Well, thanks, Michael. This one is kind of, I don't know, it's one of those that, like you said, you don't want to scare us, but it just feels like such an unknown. And I think back to even before the pandemic, none of us were expecting, for so many companies to need to move to a work from home or some type of a work remote, which is, something that manufacturing companies really didn't even have the luxury of for a lot of their workforce. But the companies that were what we would, the buzzword today is resilient. They were able to pivot quickly, and they had put processes and different people into positions and places where they could quickly pivot and make the change. So they were considered resilient. I kind of think of that in terms of when this comes out, it's probably going to come out overnight and change our whole world. So knowing that at least we have some lead time here, that something like this is probably coming. Most of the manufacturing companies, most of us are not going to come up with the quantum resistant encryption method. We're going to be dependent on somebody else to do that. But we can start now, like you're saying, making our companies more technology resilient, and not just saying, oh, well, it's a legacy equipment, it's a legacy, we can't do anything about that. Right. We've got to start thinking about how to air gap or otherwise protect that equipment, and also be able to pivot and introduce new encryption technologies and new methods into our technology in these companies. Is that kind of the base of what you're saying?
Yeah, you nailed it. Exactly, right. It is going to come out relatively quickly. It's not here today, but it very well easily could be here, next year. So yeah, make sure that you're resilient. Make sure that you have that ability to pivot and move as quickly as possible. Don't rely on, oh, my software is old, I can't upgrade it, right? It's going to need to be at some point. All right, so the next section, we wanted to address some of the advanced tactics and techniques that these threat actors are using. So to kind of kick off this section, we do have a polling question. I believe this should be up on your screen now. Yep, looks like the polling question is open. So the question really is, how many organizations, or have you ever heard of haveibeenpwned.com or used any other type of site to check for leaked credentials?
So everyone should be seeing that poll now. Go ahead and feel free to check off kind of where your company is at in relationship to looking up credential leaks on your employees using a site like haveibeenpwned.com.
Yeah, so and the reason that this is important is, as we'll see here, let me see if I can run this video. So what we have is most organizations, oops. Can you still see that video, Thomas?
I can't. What we are seeing right now is, it looks like you just took back control. So we were seeing the results from the polls. I was going to give those to you, but they are gone.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. If anyone, Laura, are you able to present those results back to us? There we go. So let me just share the results with you, Michael, real quick.
Please.
We have 18% of our respondents have said yes, they have used a site like Have I Been Pawned to check credential leaks. 62% said no, and we had about 20% say that they were not sure.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. Please let me know if you can see this video.
You'll need to share your screen, I think.
Oh, give me 1 second. Sorry about that. Yes, there we go.
You're sharing the presenter view.
I do apologize. Give me 1 second here. I think it's because I've got the video open. Let me close this.
So while some of you may not have actually used Have I Been Pawned directly or a tool like that, you will find that if you're using something like a password manager or other tools like that, quite often they will automatically check for Have I Been Pawned to see if the passwords that a user is trying to save as a password manager is actually already part of a previous breach. Michael, we're still seeing presenter view, just so you know.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if the video is just not going to be able to show in the shared screen.
Yeah, let me move to the next slide, see if this helps me out a little bit better here.
So thinking of, that Have I Been Pawned while Michael's getting this technical difficulty taken care of. The reason that's important is because we'll find that at times, if someone has been part of a previous breach, say, I know years ago there was a LinkedIn breach, and all of the usernames, their passwords, and other items were made publicly available. There was also the Experian breach, I forget now, but the Runkeeper and some of the other tools that people use for health fitness, and passwords and emails were publicly made available. Those have now been correlated into a large dump of passwords that an attacker can scan through, gather passwords on an email, and then try all those passwords to see if they can use them to gain access to your Great Plains ERP software, maybe as a low privilege user, but then they're going to use those exploits that Michael was showing earlier to escalate their privileges to an admin and then begin to attack your data. So it is important that we track and keep an eye on possibly breached credentials that our employees may have had publicly made available.
Absolutely. Can you see my screen now, Thomas?
Yes, it looks great. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Sorry about that, folks. Yeah, so the reason we wanted to talk about Have I Been Pwned and sites like this, as Thomas was saying, by human nature, we try to make things easy for us. So we like to have simplistic passwords or things that we can remember. So attackers obviously can look up these breaches as we do. So this is an example of a system we have at our disposal. So we collect various data breaches, and then we'll search through them when we're doing a penetration test or working with a client to see what is your potential leakage. We take that information, let's just say, for instance, we find, MicroView's account, and it's got, password 1, and then in a different breach, it's got password 2. Well, logic would dictate that I'm probably going to use something like password 3 or password 4 next. So I would then take that information and try to utilize that that schema, if you will, to gain access either to external systems through a VPN or, as Thomas mentioned, through the Great Plains software. Maybe I already have a foothold using something like malware. I'm already inside your organization, so then I'm going to have the ability, sort of the advantage of knowing what your users do. It's also helpful to look across an organization and see that, hey, everyone's password starts with a number or ends with, has a capital letter in it or something like that. And I can sort of start to understand what your requirements are, and as an attacker, build a more logical strategy for attacking those passwords or guessing those passwords, and hopefully be more correct. So hopefully that won't play. Okay, cool. So it is important to use something like Have I Been Pwned. It's extremely simple. You just go there and type in your email address, and it searches the breaches for you. There's other sites as well. It's just I think Have I Been Pwned is one of the most predominant ones out there. So of course, a new-ish type of attack that many organizations are facing, or individuals are facing, I get these almost daily now, is SMS phishing, or what's known as smishing these days. So attackers have gotten wise that email blocking and email filtering hasn't let a lot of phishing or spam through, or they're getting sort of blocked at that avenue. So what they're doing now is just texting you. The common question I always get is, well, how did they get my phone number? Why are they texting me? Really, they're just sort of casting that net. Phone numbers are sequential, so they're just going through basically all the different phone numbers that exist and casting a very wide net and seeing if they get lucky enough for somebody to click on something. So you'll often see that it'll come from either an email address, such as the one across to the top of the screen there. So something rather nonsensical. It's certainly, at a Hotmail account, so it's probably not an organization, right? Most of us have our own domain, or it's at, outlook.com or something like that. You'll also notice the links inside these messages are quite, again, nonsensical. It's not like, mybank.com or something like that. So obviously, don't click on these. And generally, I delete these. So one of these is actually from a message that I did receive personally, and the other one was one that I had just found off the internet. Mostly, I just delete these, but it just so happened when I was writing this presentation, I received one, so that was kind of nice and timely. But with our workforce obviously being remote these days, most everyone has a mobile device, phone or tablet that they're conducting work from. So this is a very realistic attack. Attackers can gain access into your Android or iPhones, and then again scrape sensitive information, gain access to your email. gain access to potential passwords that you have stored or other sensitive information. Some of us even have VPNs on our phones that connect us back to our corporations. So it's a very realistic attack vector that we're seeing more and more of in recent years.
Hey, Michael,
Mhm.
do some of these include like, I mean, like one would be for it to actually infect your phone and gain access to tools and equipment that might be on your phone. But I think some of them too might just take you back to a credential harvesting webpage or something. And the goal would be to get your Outlook or your email password and credentials.
Yeah, that's a good point as well, right? So for instance, the bottom example there, your FedEx package is waiting. You need to visit this site so you can receive your package. So if you were to click on that link, you'll most likely get, as Thomas was saying, some kind of login page. So hey, put your information in here, and I'll get you access to your FedEx package, right? Again, using that sort of wide net to hopefully get several individuals, either give them their current password or something very similar to the password. Because again, I mean, human nature, right? We want to be able to remember our passwords. We don't want these long cryptic strings, right? We have to write those down. So chances are you either have the same password on multiple accounts or you have very similar passwords on multiple accounts, right? With maybe a small permutation in between. So yeah, it's very common. If they do not infect your smart device directly, then it's probably going to be some kind of credential harvesting site. So I know we've been talking about this a lot and kind of throughout, but we're seeing a lot of the older style of attacks, or rather the same type of attack, but under new sort of technology again. So like that phishing, right? Phishing's been around forever. I think phishing's probably been around since email was invented, but now we're seeing more, SMS attacks, more voicemail phishing, right? Or voice phishing, excuse me, not voicemail, but voice phishing, where they're calling you up, right? Been trying to reach you about your car insurance, same kind of thing, right? The attacker's trying to get money or your credentials or whatever. Of course, everyone I think is familiar with viruses and malware. They still exist. They have not gone away. The companies out there like McAfee and Symantec and Microsoft of the world are doing a really good job of protecting us against viruses and malware, but they still exist. They still come through. So obviously we still need to be diligent on that front, but be aware of all the new types of attacks that are coming out. We did already kind of talk about password guessing, and that kind of stuff leads to, well, password guessing and like browser-based attacks can lead to things like account takeovers. And really that's where the attacker wants to get, right? How can I get information to gain access to your organization and eventually take over the system so I can do bad things with it, either steal it or encrypt it and do ransomware or something like that. So as the world has expanded, definitely as Thomas said earlier, into the cloud and work remote, work from home, and things like that, we are seeing an increase in ransomware, right? So it's on a very upward trajectory that we need to be aware of. One of the biggest things with ransomware, as we said earlier on, is to have backups. Attackers, of course, know this, so they want to find those backups. So generally, what attackers are doing now, what we found is they'll gain access to your organization and not necessarily ransom your software or ransom your information right away or encrypt it. They're going to look around for those backups. Can I either cut you off or wreck the backup or do something there, so that way when I do encrypt your information, the ransomware attack is going to be more successful, right? Because that is the number one answer when anyone ever asks, how do you defeat or how do you prepare against ransomware attacks? It's have a proper backup, right? So attackers know that. So there's a couple of different ransomware style attacks. We'll go over here really quickly, but Generally, it's not. It's something to think about. Is a lot of companies that we talk to is, my company is not that big. My information is not necessarily valuable to others. Why should I be worried about ransomware attacks? It's not necessarily that your information is valuable to others, but it's valuable to you. And that's really what a ransomware attack is, right? So as an attacker, I want to be able to take control of your information and sell it back to you at hopefully a high price. So it doesn't matter really what industry you're in, if it's banking or healthcare or manufacturing. It's what value does your information have to you, right? And if that's valuable, you have trade secrets or you have intellectual property that you need to protect and want to keep safe, then obviously ransomware is something you want to take seriously. And that's where we sort of get back to the whole idea of making sure systems are patched, making sure older technology is not exposed to the internet or it's not overly exposed to the internal network at large. Oops.
Hey, Michael, just I noticed at the end of that there was this page shaming sites, and while the data may be important to you, I think we're also seeing that the dwell time of the attacker is to exfiltrate some data so that they can expose it and hurt your brand, or the data may be important to your own client or to your employees. So if they can get a hold of your HR data with your savings plans or your retirement plans, things like that, or health insurance, to be able to expose that to the internet would be damaging to the company. So when you think about shaming sites, if the attacker can hang out in your network and slowly exfiltrate your data for a long period of time, then they have a double extortion kind of, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's something we obviously want to be aware of, and that may be a little bit above basic, but it's something that if you have a cybersecurity program in your organization, it's definitely something to consider. Is looking at and reviewing things like shaming sites or I don't know if Pastebin is really used much anymore, but that was always the classic example. And searching sort of for your information out there and see if somebody might have it, and sort of hopefully find the issue quickly and resolve the issue. But yes, absolutely, if they can exfiltrate your data and publish it online, then it can make you look bad or your employees look bad and hurt your brand. It's not just about deleting your data. If your customers lose faith in your brand, then you're going to ultimately lose money. So how do we protect this? How do we protect against all these things, right? There's such a wide range of different vulnerabilities and attacks and attack vectors. Really, how do we stop this? And really, it kind of boils down to making sure you're doing the basic stuff extremely well. And one of the best things that you can do is implement multi-factor authentication. So for another polling question we have here is, do you know, have you implemented multi-factor authentication at your office or work? I think it's just a yes or no question, if I remember correctly.
There is a not sure. So
not
yes,
sure.
no, not sure.
Yes, no, not sure. Okay. So we'll give people a few minutes or a few seconds.
I want to remind everyone that the handouts are you'll probably see a link to them on the side panel of the GoToMeeting console. So you're able to download and have access to these slides after this presentation if you'd like those.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have our results coming in here. And currently we have almost 70%, 69% say yes, they have implemented multi-factor authentication. That's really encouraging to hear.
Yes.
Almost 30% say no, and we have about 2% that are not sure.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, that is extremely encouraging to hear, right? Because multi-factor is sort of everywhere these days. If you have pretty much anything to do with Google, everything's multi-factor. I'm trying to think. Most every service I have, banking sites or banking apps or things like that, our VPN is multi-factor for our office. It's becoming extremely common, and it is actually pretty easy to implement. So that's obviously a big takeaway, is knowing that multi-factor doesn't need to be scary. It doesn't need to be inhibiting to your employees. It can actually be pretty easy to use. Generally, there's some kind of soft token on your phone, such as like Duo or Google Authenticator or something like that. Microsoft has one. There's a wide range of them. But yeah, it's pretty easy. You can get, push notifications where I try to log in and it just sends an alert to my phone and says, "Is this you?" And you click yes, and then I'm logged in. So it doesn't need to be cumbersome to your individual. So definitely worked with organizations that have hesitancy because they do not think multi-factor will be accepted by their employees or their staff, right? So I think doing some education around how to use multi-factor, and not only that it can protect you in an organization, but it can also protect you in your personal life, right? So, if you're not using multi-factor on your Gmail or other, services like in your banking site, definitely, look into that. Most of them have it. As we talked about before, in the whole idea of having your backup safe. So a lot of people, or some, I shouldn't say a lot, some organizations that we've worked with in the past recently have backups like, yep, I've got a backup. I've copied my information over to the share drive, right? Well, that's not necessarily a good backup because it's still accessible on the network, right? It's still under sort of read-write access, and I can, as an attacker, I can gain access to that and either delete it, etc. Or maybe I'm backing it up to an external hard drive or a tape drive, but that device is still connected to the backup system. Again, as an attacker, they can get into that backup and delete it or encrypt it as well, right? So knowing where to put your backups and how to properly protect your backups against attacks is extremely important. One big thing we're seeing these days is putting backups into the cloud. That's become a very popular avenue. That way it's sort of off premises or even off-prem as far as not physical, but in your cloud environment. If you think of your in-cloud environment as your premises and then you back it up to somewhere else. So it's separate from your organization's infrastructure. We kind of talked about antivirus and malware a couple slides ago, where yes, absolutely, we're doing a good job kind of keeping safe from those sort of more historical threats, but they still exist. It's something we still need to be vigilant about, making sure things are updated, and not just on our workstations, on our mobile devices, on our servers. Pretty much any endpoint that can receive files or has user interaction should be protected against those kind of things. So although it can be seen as a burden, it's definitely important and helpful to have antivirus everywhere you go. And I think one last point I want to touch on, I know we're getting kind of late here, but one last point I wanted to touch on is the ability to log and know your logs, right? From some of the forensics investigations that we've seen in the past, the issue is really how long you're logging and that your logs are accessible and good, right? So if you maybe you're logging, but again, the attacker was able to access your logs and delete them, or they're rolling over too quickly because your hard drive is full, or they're just non-existent, right? So I enable logging, but it's only for 72 hours, right? It's not really going to help you. We're looking for logs that go back months, preferably 6 months or more, which can be difficult depending on the level of logging and how many systems you're logging, but something to think about alongside your backups, right? Where do I put these logs? Where are they stored and how are they protected? Oops, there we go. All right, so we have another polling question here related to passwords. So what do we think as far as this password on the screen here? It's secure password. It's got some special characters. We have uppercase. Oh, I noticed I didn't put a number in it, but we got 3 out of the 4, right? We got uppercase, lowercase, and special characters. So how long do you think this will take to crack?
I'm counting it. It looks like it's about 18 characters or so.
Yeah, I believe that's about right.
It depends on if you include, I'm sorry, the question mark and the quotes probably aren't part of it.
Yeah, the quotes were not supposed to be part of it. That I mean, that's a good point. The quotes definitely change the cracking time.
So I count 16 characters.
Most people don't put quotes around their password.
Okay, so we got some people saying 30 minutes or less. That's about half of the respondents. 1 hour or less is 22%. 1 day or less, 12%. Longer than 1 day, 10%. And we got 5% saying nobody's going to crack that.
Yeah, it's actually much less. It's within the minutes range. So I believe it's like 5 to 8 minutes it would take a standard password cracker to get that password. Two main reasons. It's based off of dictionary words. So secure and password are both dictionary words, of course, and it's a very common permutation that a lot of humans would do. So we've got, the $ as the S. That's a very common substitution. With the capital P for password, etc., and then a special character at the end. We've got the exclamation point, of course. So it's not a horrible password, right? It definitely ticks all the boxes as far as a strong password, but in reality, it is actually a horrible password, right? I mean, if you look at that on paper, it's like, it's not bad. It's 16 characters and we have our special characters in there, etc. But it's actually pretty easy to crack. So it would actually be better to have a longer password with more sort of nonsensical words, the blue cat jumps over the car or something like that.
Hey, I hate to interrupt you, Michael. I'm guessing you probably think we're seeing your slides. So can you display your slide real quick?
Oh, I do apologize. I assumed you were seeing my slides. How's that?
Okay, we see the polling questions, so good there.
Okay,
I
see
mean,
that one?
I'm seeing this. There you go. Yep, we see the top security controls you already know about.
Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, for instance, at the bottom of the screen here, we have a very cryptic password that's sort of leaded out and it's got special characters and numbers, but that's very difficult for us humans to remember, right? But in computer world, that's going to take a computer approximately 48 hours to crack. Now, obviously, depending on the style of the system, but a much better password is what we refer to as a passphrase. So in this case, flying purple snail gallon is a completely nonsensical string of words, but it's easy for a human to remember. But it's going to take a computer a very long time to break that, right? In excess of 1,000 years. So again, depending on the type of hashing that's used for the password, etc. But you kind of get the idea here. So complexity is not always better. Sometimes length and a little bit more nonsensicalness we're finding is actually a little bit better.
So just in thinking through that, if an attacker uses a automated computer system, the second one's going to be harder to guess because the words don't necessarily fit together. There's greater entropy, we'd say, between those. But
correct.
If someone was trying to use a longer passphrase and they made it based off of some of their favorite items that we would find on their Facebook, an attacker could easily guess those by putting those words together to hopefully figure out what the password is. So we're saying long is best, but it needs to be not easily guessable is what I'm understanding.
Correct. Yeah, it shouldn't really have any link to you, right? Shouldn't have your names or your child's names or birth dates or anything like that in it that I could easily find through social media, right? So it's completely nonsensical and has really nothing to do with my hobbies or interests or my personal life.
Good.
I do not have any pet flying purple snails. So we kind of already talked about multi-factor authentication. So that's just something to continue to think about. Of course, we always beat the drum of longer passwords, as we were just talking about. So 15 characters or better. They should definitely be unique to your product, right? So each banking site should have their own password, or your Gmail account or email account, whatever it is, have your own particular password. Obviously, security awareness training and exercises is huge, right? Because attackers, the easiest way for an attacker to get in is to gain access through a human being, right? So if we can social engineer, either through phishing or smishing or whatever it is, and I can trick your users into giving me access to your organization, I don't need to guess passwords, right? So having that security awareness, when not to give away, what information not to give away, how do I secure my passwords, things like that. So very, very important. I think most of these we've kind of already talked about. One we didn't touch on was the cyber insurance. So that is extremely popular these days. So again, depending on your internal cybersecurity program, cyber insurance can definitely be a good avenue for you to pursue. If you're not familiar with cyber insurance, it's just like any regular insurance. It's there. You pay money to an organization like insurance company, and then if something bad happens, they reimburse you or help you sort of offset that cost to get back on track. Just like regular insurance, like health insurance, if I'm a non-smoker and I don't go cliff diving on the weekends, my insurance rates are probably going to be lower, right? Because I don't take a lot of risks. Similarly, in the cyber insurance world, if you do your due diligence and you have a good security awareness training program and you do regular penetration testing and you're SOC 2 compliant, or, and all these things, your insurance could go down. I'm not going to say it will, but it most likely will or should go down. The premiums will decrease. So something to keep in mind or to think about, depending on, again, how much is your data worth to you, or how much money could you potentially lose if you were down for days or weeks due to some kind of cyber attack. So then I believe this is one of the last sections, but emerging security solutions and strategies. So again, how to sort of continue to protect against this kind of these kind of attacks. The buzzword of the day, or one that we've heard, maybe you've heard more frequently, is immutable backups. So the idea here is I'm writing to some kind of media, either a tape or a hard drive. Most likely these days it's in the cloud, but I'm writing those backups, and then I cannot change that information, right? It's immutable in a way that I could read from it if I needed to restore from the backup, but I cannot change the backup after it's been created. And that's an important part. Because if it cannot be changed, then the attacker cannot delete it or encrypt it or do anything evil to it. It's true to say they could still read from it, but they cannot destroy the backup, which is really what we're after when we're talking about cyber attacks, right? We want to make sure that we have that good, solid backup that cannot be destroyed. Just talked about it, but obviously cloud-based, definitely put those behind multi-factor authentication if you can. Most, I think, backup services offer some type of multi-factor authentication. And preferably if you don't have a cloud presence, or you don't like to work with the cloud, then make sure your backups are offline. What we mean by that is you write it to a portable hard drive, and then the portable hard drive is unplugged. The attacker can't get to it if it's could physically be sitting next to it, but from a network standpoint, I no longer can touch that backup, right? There's other things to consider like fires, but from a cybersecurity attack perspective, as long as it's no longer connected to your systems, that's definitely a step up. Two of the other big ones are really the endpoint detection and response. So again, we've got the antivirus and malware, which everyone's familiar with. But one of the big things that a lot of software vendors are moving to is having a firewall and intrusion prevention monitoring software all bundled together. So it's kind of like a client-side suite, if you will, of products that help protect those systems. And it's important to consider that don't put those just on workstations. Servers and other devices are equally as important, right? And I think one thing that we see that is not done often enough is to filter outbound traffic. So egress filtering is what that's referred to as. A lot of people block with their firewalls of traffic coming in, which is great. But again, through social engineering, I could potentially gain access to your organization. And if I'm trying to exfiltrate that information and move it to a system that I control, you would not necessarily see that. So blocking or monitoring outbound traffic is extremely important as well. So I know we got a couple of minutes left here, but some of the newer things, some of the newer recommendations that we have is extending that workstation management and filtering and stuff to home. So in the new era we live in, everyone works from home or works remote. And it's really easy to say that, when you're inside the office, you're not allowed to visit these sites, or you're not allowed to email sensitive documents out, or etc. But making sure that same management principle to those internal workstations is sent to systems that are remote is extremely important as well. And again, retaining those logs for longer periods of time, 6-9 months is a good general rule to make sure that you have enough information, because we're seeing attackers live in networks longer. So they'll break in, they'll sit, they'll be quiet, they'll look around, and then as the months go by, the logs fall off, so we no longer can tell how they got access, right? So the more log data you have, and the potential is we can figure out where and how they got in. And of course, periodic testing of controls is extremely important. Obviously, through pen testing or security audits, things like that is huge. Making sure that you're sort of up to stuff. And then finally, testing systems hosted in the cloud. I think a lot of people put their information, or they'll move to a cloud environment and assume I'm safe. It's in the cloud, it's fine. But that's still your information. And depending on the cloud provider and how things are set up, you could still definitely be responsible for protecting those boxes, through patching or, antivirus or whatever it is. So check with your cloud provider and understand who has responsibility for what, in making sure that those systems are secure.
I think I've heard at times that the cloud security, or the cloud provider typically they carry the responsibility of protecting the cloud. You carry the responsibility of protecting what's in the cloud. I think that's kind of the rule of thumb.
Yeah.
So I do have I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yep. No, I was just going to say, you're absolutely correct. As a general rule, yep, that's correct.
So we do have one question here that came in, and I know we're at the top of the hour. Are there any issues with having employees use personal phones for multi-factor authentication at their business?
That's a good question. I would say no. I do not see any major red flags with that. As long as the device can be trusted and secured, and what I mean by that is, big thing is making sure it's not jailbroken or rooted or doesn't have any other malicious software on it. So depending on the application that you're using for your multi-factor authentication, it's going to do things like checking for root access on your phone and then not run, things like that.
Is it safe to say that if that's going to keep you from implementing MFA, we would rather see you have multi-factor authentication than
that's fair.
Than not do multi-factor authentication, because the employees may have to use their personal phones.
Right. Because what organization wants to buy everybody a brand new phone just so they can have multi-factor authentication,
right? Well, if anybody has any other pressing questions, we can go ahead and ask them now at this time. Let's go ahead and do this polling question, and we'll be ready to wrap up here in a minute.
Yeah, I think this is the last polling question. So what do you have for cybersecurity program, or do you have a cybersecurity program at your organization now? I believe this is the last polling question.
So does your organization have a cybersecurity program? Yes, no, not sure.
And I apologize, I know we ran a little bit over here, but as Thomas mentioned, these slides are available, so you're certainly welcome to look through this information. As a professional services organization, Sickage is obviously here to help. We love partnering with people and making sure that you're safe. That's really our goal, right? That's why we do this, is to make sure that we can make the world safer. Hopefully, that's the goal here. So if you need
Okay,
anything,
so
by all means, reach out.
thank you, Michael. So we see almost 90% say yes, the organization does have a security program. 6% say no, and 6% say they're not sure.
Okay. That's really encouraging. I'm glad to see such a large percentage of companies having cybersecurity awareness, or not just awareness, excuse me, cybersecurity programs in general to help protect their organizations. That's huge. So
Yes,
if you
that's
don't have
exciting.
one, if there's something that obviously we can do to help, by all means reach out to us. But hopefully you will have a cybersecurity program soon.
Okay, so we do have a couple more questions here, and let's go back to that question about using a personal phone for MFA at business. The question was, apparently we misunderstood it. It's really comes down to, is it okay to use personal items for business use? So having your own personal laptop, I think of what you said earlier about pushing out those controls to the home users. And so using a personal phone for VPN access or whatever it might be. Um, what thoughts do you have about using personal items for business use?
Um, I think it comes down to how much you trust your employees and what the employees are doing. So, for example, in the baking industry, that would be a really hard no. There's lots of governance and controls that need to go around the information that is stored and transmitted through those devices. So, you will have a company laptop, you will have a company cell phone, et cetera, and you're not supposed to use your personal equipment for that. However, depending on, again, your organization or what the individual does for your organization, they might need to use their personal device. I think when those circumstances come into play, it's really a question of, can you make a policy to control those devices? So, for example, they do make software packages that you can sort of isolate things within inside of a mobile device. So I own my mobile phone, but the company puts the piece of software on here, and that's where all of my corporate data lives. That's where I check my email and get my VPN access. If my phone is lost, I give the company permission to wipe the phone or delete that information off the device, right? So,
Yeah,
there's situations like that.
I
I
think
think
that's
that's
probably a
more
pretty
common.
common.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's pretty common. Um, from that standpoint, if a company needed to determine which employees or what their risks are for that, one of the things I would recommend is getting a risk assessment or a risk
Yeah.
analysis. So like our GRC team can help you create a complete risk register that goes through and says what data needs to be protected, where is it stored, how is it accessed, where is it backed up, how is it destroyed, and in the process determine the which people should have access to it and to what level of protection it needs. When you're able to give yourself that type of a risk assessment, and you're able to fill out a risk register that way, you really are able to then laser focus your cybersecurity budget. You're able to determine what audits are needed to make sure we're there. So I would highly recommend, a risk assessment as you look at determining the effectiveness and even the extent of your cybersecurity program.
Absolutely.
All right, we have one last question. I know we're over on time. If anyone needs to drop, we do have the handouts, and you should have a survey that I want to remind you to fill out here at the end. This last question is, should rarely used company equipment be returned to the office until it's needed? So, Michael, can you answer that one real quick?
Sure. I guess it would depend on what are we talking about as far as rarely used, and how inconvenient is it to have it moved back and forth, you know, to individuals that need it. Probably, I think the smart answer is yes, that's a great idea on paper, but it might not be logistically sound for your organization.
Good. And maybe if the equipment is like a laptop or something like that, if you can have full disk encryption or something to that effect on it. So if it is lost or stolen, the data is still protected even at rest. Well,
Yeah,
hey, very good. Go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. I was just going to add to that. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So if you can full disk encrypt your laptop, put it in a drawer at someone's house, it's less likely to get, compromised. Where then you're going to save a lot of cost of I'm going to ship that laptop back and forth to the organization and waste time and money.
Yeah, very good. All right. Well, just as some, thank you again, Michael. Appreciate your
Pleasure.
you taking us through all of this and giving us your advice. Do you have any closing remarks?
I think the big takeaway here is really just review your infrastructure, know what you have, know where your backups go. Make sure that you're reviewing your cybersecurity plan and on a regular basis. Cybersecurity is not a one and done kind of a thing. It's an ongoing process. So if there's anything that obviously we can do to help, by all means, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to assist.
Thank you, Michael. So that brings us to the end of the webinar. At the conclusion, you should have a short survey launch. Please complete the evaluation for your CPE credit. Certificates will be emailed after the program and within 2 weeks. So this concludes our discussion today. Don't hesitate to reach out to us for any further questions or conversations. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.